#1 Advisory Committee. If you could please stand and join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the
United States of America,
United States of America,
and to the republic for which it
to the
stands,
republic which stands
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Kelly, could you do a roll call, please?
Yes. Benelli?
Here.
Benelli? Okay. Amo?
Here.
Cheney?
Here.
Bartel? Not with us just yet. Vero?
Here.
And Tui?
Here.
5 present.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Just first off, I want to thank everybody we did a lot of scrambling around right as the pandemic was hitting, and we still were able to get some of our legislative requests, 3 of them through. And with that, I'd like to see if one of our experts, Langdon or Eric, Bob Gray, Anthony, Mary Beth, if anybody'd like to give us a little recap on that. This won't be a long meeting. Just looking to get a little recap and timeline and what our next steps would be.
Okay, so this is Langdon. We've circulated our notice of intent to declare lead agency on the project, and the deadline for anybody to object, I believe, is tomorrow. We've heard from the Village of Harriman consenting to us being lead agency. So, presuming that nobody objects, then I think our next step would be to send up a resolution declaring the legislature's intent to be lead agency. And I think if this committee is conceptually good with it, what we would do is ask Delaware Engineering at the same time to prepare some sort of a positive declaration with respect to that. So you could declare yourself lead agency, pos DECA in the same meeting, and that would require Delaware doing the long form, at least part 2 of the seeker, in order for you to do that. So I think that would be our game plan, Bob.
Scoping document.
And a scoping document as well, Bob is saying. So I think.
Hello, everybody.
I think that would be our game plan for the period of the next month and a half to have that done the first week of August, given scheduling. Okay,
and then so we'd be shooting for August, not July, for that.
Well, I think given that the deadline expires tomorrow to object for lead agency, I think it's probably hard pressed because we've got physical services, I think, next week maybe.
Okay.
I think it'd be hard pressed because the deadline's tomorrow to put this through physical services. Unless, if you want to, I think we could do the declaration of lead agency, but I also think you could just do it all at the August meeting. Declare lead agency, pause DEC, and come up with a draft scope.
Okay, yeah, I think we'll take your lead on that, Langdon. And
so
Antoinette?
Peter, this is Antoinette. I think it would go to the committees in July, and then our next legislative session is August 6th. So we would vote on it August 6th.
August 6th. Okay.
Okay.
That's exactly my goal. What I'd like to avoid is a second meeting of this committee unless you want one in order to do that. So I think I just wanted to lay out the process today, and then Delaware can present that scoping document, that long form, at physical services at your July meeting, unless you want to have a second meeting of this committee to go over that. I don't really care too much.
No, I think everybody is pretty. I know you guys are real busy, so let's stick to that timeline.
And that would be for longevity and expansion.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then after August, just a quick bird's eye view. What would be required with the seeker? You mentioned in part 2. Now, do we need to do an environmental impact study, or is anything like that coming down the road, or what? If you could just give us 1,000 foot.
Sure. An EIS is a decision for another day. Part of me wants to avoid it. Part of me says go do it. Ultimately, Mary Beth is going to make a recommendation on that, and I think we're going to, follow her lead. So she's got a lot more expertise on what's going to be in the scoping document and on the long form than I do. I know she's with us. If you want her to discuss that, she's much more qualified than I do.
Okay, Mary Beth, do you have anything to add to that? Is Mary
Are you
Beth
on
on?
mute, Mary Beth?
I can make jokes, Mary Beth, that we can't hear you for the first time ever, but I'm just not going to do that because I get in trouble later.
I think it's something in the lower left hand.
Okay, there we go. I couldn't, the
Okay.
unmute button wasn't working. Sorry about that. I was clicking it and nothing was happening. So our process from here to get to this point, we filled out part 1 of the long environmental assessment form that describes the project. We declared our intent to act as lead agency because we have other agencies involved that will have approvals and or might fund or fund this project. You guys are undertaking it. So once the period of 30 days has expired for folks to state their jurisdiction and or state their desire to be lead agency, which we don't think anyone's going to do that, then our next step will be to fill out part 2, which goes through and describes what the potential impacts of the project might be, and part 3, which describes whether those are important or not and require additional evaluation in order to determine impacts and mitigation measures. Langdon said, the decision of an EIS is kind of down the road, but at that point, once we have a part 3 prepared, we will be either recommending a positive declaration, which means an environmental impact statement would be prepared, or a negative declaration, meaning that we know enough to know what our mitigation measures would be and that we can just move on. At this point, because this is an expansion and because we have the SPDs, the regulatory side of this with the variance, we are thinking that this is going to indicate that we do an environmental impact statement. So that would be what we'd be talking about in July at Physical Services, is reviewing part 2 and part 3 of the EAF, reviewing a positive declaration, and if a positive declaration is issued, we would have a scoping document, which basically is a fancy table of contents for an environmental impact statement. That scoping document is subject to public review. We have to establish a process for the public to have input. And we would like to, because we understand there's some urgency here, get all of that accomplished so that at the legislative meeting on August 6th, that's what the legislature would be considering. They would be declaring lead agency, reviewing parts 2 and 3 of the EAF, adopting a positive declaration and the scoping document, and establishing a public input period. All of that in August, and then we conduct public scoping in August. We could be adopting a final scoping document in September at Physical Services and or this committee, however you do that. And then that final scoping document, which again is the table of contents for an environmental impact statement, would go before the legislature on October 1st. So you can tell that the process kind of goes out over time because of the different steps, but that would be our kind of immediate work that we would be doing.
Okay, and then how long does an environmental impact study usually take?
Well, in this case, because we've done so much work already, we don't have to create really new documentation. We're really gathering the information that we have, putting in the environmental impact statement, and then soliciting comments from involved agencies like the DEC, like anyone who might fund this, as well as the public. So it can go pretty quickly from there over a few months. But that period, then we have a draft document that's subject to review by the public. We have to have some time for that to happen. Then we prepare a final document, which is a response to the comments and questions that are asked. And we prepare a finding statement and we're done. So we're probably looking at early 2021 by the time that we get all the pieces and parts finished.
Okay, thank you, Mary Beth. I'd like to open questions up to any of the other committee members. Legislator Benelli, Legislator Ramo, anybody?
I do have a question. Mary Beth, you had made comments in regard to public comment period. Are we holding any public hearings that we have to notice? I see
Great
you
question.
shaking your head.
So that's a great question. For two things. For the scoping, we're not required to have a hearing, but we are required to engage the public in some way. That's sometimes done as an information session. Certainly, the draft scoping document would be available on the county's website for people to look at. We should set up some kind of an email address, physical address at the office building where people can mail or send in comments. So there is a process there. It's not necessarily a hearing, formal hearing per se. And then once we do the draft environmental impact statement, a public hearing is optional, although we usually do recommend it simply because you're going through this process. It's a good way to engage the public. And that is a formal, if we do choose to do that, if the legislature chooses to do that, that is a formal hearing with notice. The notice under seeker is 10 days. Notice between, the 10 days, not including the date of the hearing from the time that you put the notice in the newspaper. So that's the schedule there. And we would be looking at doing that probably sometime towards the end of the year in the schedule that we're in, maybe December or January, given the timeline that we're in.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from committee members?
Yeah. Legislator Tortel, I have a question.
Yes, Lori.
Sorry, I couldn't do the video feed today. My question is, once we put that draft and everything up on our website, are we required to put notices out in the paper and let people know that this is here and this is happening? Or how do we notify on that? What's the rules for that part of it?
So the statutory process, right? So there's a statutory process that's laid out in Part 617 of the regulations, and then there's just sort of common sense. The statutory process requires that we circulate these documents to any involved agency, anyone who has requested them, and any interested agency. So that's a fairly limited group of people. And then the other thing we're required to do is put a notice in something called the Environmental Notice Bulletin, the ENB, which is an online publication of the DEC that is published once a week, every week. So that's the statutory requirement. But beyond that, it certainly makes sense to, when you have a public hearing, you notice a public hearing just like you notice any other public hearing that you have, say, for your budget or any other purpose. There isn't a requirement in the law that you, say, send a notice to the communities or things like that, although that may be very prudent to do in this case. And that's one of the things that we have to do is come up with sort of a plan for how we'll conduct public participation for this. We certainly want to make sure that everyone who wants to comment has an opportunity to do so.
Okay, thank you very much, Mary Beth.
Sure.
Chairman, it's Barry.
Yes, legislator.
Question. Where in the process are we going to tackle the issue of who's paying for this? Is that something that has to come as part and parcel with the environmental impact statement?
So I can answer one part of this, but then Langdon or others should jump in. So EISs don't really deal with finances. That's not really something that they're involved with directly. So the EIS itself is an environmental document. It's going to look at human health, environmental health, water quality, those kinds of issues. So the how does this get paid for part, while we still certainly have to recognize, because seeker says we have to do seeker for anything we're going to fund, undertake, or approve as a public body. So we have to address the fact that we're going to fund this. Seeker in and of itself won't go into the details of who's going to pay for this, or it's going to be bonded, or this or that. I think that's a separate discussion that perhaps Langdon should address.
So right now, we've talked to our bond counsel about different ways we can finance this, and we're trying to work through the different options with them still. I think I understand the overall directive of this committee is that you want to have the payment come from people who are going to have the growth, who are inducing the growth. And that's, I understand the goal. So we're working with bond counsel on that methodology and want to have one for you. And look, if I'm wrong on that goal, somebody speak up, but that's my understanding.
No, I think you're right on it there, Langdon.
If,
Just to clarify that the goal, because we do have two, this is Eric Denaga, sorry. I think we understand that the longevity improvements will apply to the entire district, and then we have the expansion that would fall into, I think, the mentioned goal.
Yeah, I think,
We're talking about one in the secret. Sorry.
Yes.
The district and the Moodna communities for the longevity.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, Anthony just said the Moodna communities too will be part of the longevity, and correct.
Mhm.
so getting back to what Mary Beth said about it not being a direct part of seeker, does the decision have to be made before we finalize seeker, or can it wait?
Actually, this is a good question. So you really technically are not in a position to make decisions about this until after seeker is done. You have to do seeker first. Once seeker is done, then any other permit, approval, undertaking, any of those kinds of things that are associated with the project can happen. So seeker is actually the first step. Then all these other things kind of follow along after it. So you'll need a finding statement in place before there are actions of the legislature regarding the project. It would commit you to do anything.
Is that anything else, Barry, or is that?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm not sure that I understand why, because it's not an action, deciding who pays for it's not necessarily an action subject to seeker, correct? And so why, I guess, how independent can it be of the actual seeker process, and or do we need to? It seems like we can't, according to what you said, Mary Beth, go ahead with a decision relative to that without having done seeker.
Right, and I guess
yeah.
I should clarify. So seeker says that you can't fund, undertake, or approve an action that until seeker is done. But you're not, when you're talking about who's
Right.
going to pay for something, it's not actually the funding part of it, right? The funding part would be, say,
Right.
adopting a bond resolution or something like that. So they really can be done together, although it's pretty intertwined. I think you're going to want to know some of the things that are going to come out in the seeker process. You know, a lot of it we've discussed. It's just going to be in one place. I certainly think the processes should proceed in a parallel track at a minimum. But you're right. There is a concept in seeker called independent utility when you're evaluating actions and you're trying to determine if one thing is being done or is necessary because of another. So in that respect, they are tied together. So we kind of have to, think about that. But you're right. It's not a direct deciding, like, say, a rate structure is an administrative proceeding, not subject to seeker.
Okay, that clarifies it. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you,
I have
Chairman.
a question. This is Antoinette. I have a question for Mr. Chapman. Would this not follow the same procedures that we used with the state controller for Beaver Dam and the rates set there, so that it would be a separate and independent process in establishing the rates that would be set based upon this project? So we would have a separate public hearing for that as well.
I think it is subject to the county law. Whether you need a separate public hearing or whether you can roll them into one, I'm not sure, but it'll be whatever it requires at the end of the day.
Okay. So that's perhaps how we address it, Barry, because I think when you go to the public hearing on the seeker, the question for the local people may not necessarily be the environmental issues. It'll be the finances of the project and who's paying for it.
Right. So I guess, Langdon, when do you expect you're going to get some enough information back from bond counsel that's going to allow us to hear what they have to say and how we can proceed and what our recommendation might be?
They haven't given me a timeline for the answer.
Okay.
I guess my question is when will we know the actual cost of the project? Wouldn't that be when you prepare the bid specs?
Right. So as you know, we've done some estimating. That estimating that you have in the engineering reports assumed that because you have to pick a time, right? So assume the project would be bid in 2020. It's now June of 2020. It's not going to be bid in 2020. We are seeing, and you guys may be seeing it as well, we are seeing some pretty substantial escalations in construction costs. At this time, we're not really sure what's causing that. There's a lot of uncertainty, as we're all aware. You're looking at bidding this out at some point in the future. What we will do is once we get more into design along the way, we usually do interim construction cost estimates as we move forward, as we know more. But we can certainly give you, for the purposes of Langdon's work with bond counsel and things, enough of an estimate as to what we're looking at in terms of capital and operation and maintenance costs to do very reasonable estimating for rate impacts. The ultimate, what is it really going to cost? You don't know until you bid the project, as you said.
Okay, thank you.
I think we have estimates now, Mary Beth, if I'm not mistaken, just over $50 million for the combined projects. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And it's about a 50-50 split between longevity improvements, those that are necessary, whether or not the plant is expanded, and the cost of expansion. Some of those, as Anthony can describe and Eric can describe, some of those things are kind of tied together. But from a practical perspective, when this project is constructed, because it sounds like we'll have two different cost bases for the purpose of charging people, we'll make sure that we are separating those costs so that in the end, you'll have documentation that will say this is the portion of the cost that was associated with simply extending the useful life of the facility that everyone benefits from, and this is the portion that's associated with creating that additional capacity that's available for future growth.
And just to add to that, just so the rest of the committee is aware, and I know Barry Cheney was on the call with us for the capital committee meetings just last week, and we discussed whether, because this was on the agenda to add to the capital list, and we discussed whether it should be listed as one project or two and combined just for capital purposes, and we sort of left that, I think, somewhat open-ended, knowing we can change it, but for now I think we were trying to do it as one project for funding purposes, knowing that if we had to later, we could always split it into two capital projects. But for now, I think that's going to be based on the advice probably of Mary Beth and whatnot moving forward. But as long as we can split those costs and account for them, I think that was the main concern.
And the $50 million estimate, what year was that based upon?
It assumes a 2020 bid.
Okay, thank you.
So we'll need to do, and we can, and I think I may have done this at some point, an escalation for you so that you can look out and kind of see as time goes by what we would expect. Mm-hmm. I will tell you, we are seeing, 5 to 10% escalation on construction costs this year from where we were last year. And we, again, some of that has to do with things that are going on overseas, with trade issues, those kinds of things. And some of it has to do with the uncertainty surrounding financing, bond markets, and no doubt the pandemic to some degree.
Mary Beth, with regard to, the capital improvements and the grants that are out there, I had received a notice from Delaware Engineering saying that there's chatter that's going, that there's going to be some to help with the job markets and to help get big projects going. And they referred to it as grant ready. When do you think we would be able to be grant ready to really roll on this,
So you're pretty close to being grant ready right now. Usually the things we tell people is you need an engineering report, you need to have done seeker, if you need any kind of an agreement with intermunicipality, that kind of stuff. We also usually include that we've gone through a sign off from the State Historic Preservation Office, which we'll be doing during the seeker process. And we need to do a smart growth statement regarding this project. So those are sort of the top five big things that are needed to be grant ready. In terms of grants, and I think I may have shared this with folks before, but in the state budget that was adopted on April 2nd, the grant funding that the state offers through the consolidated funding application process and something called the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act was reappropriated. It was appropriated at 2019 levels. So depending on how you do your math, you could consider that to be a slight deduction in the amount of money that's available, but it's still a fairly substantial amount of money. Normally, those programs are open right now for us to prepare and submit grants. They're usually due in late July or early September, depending on which program we're talking about. They have not been released by the governor's office at this time. We're hearing more and more chatter, as you said, that's a good word, from folks that they may be announced soon and may be open for applications. But there's a lot of uncertainty. And then obviously the other part of this, if folks are watching the news, is the discussion on the federal level about support for infrastructure as a way to get people back to work and a way to spur the economy. And so our objective will be to continue to position this project to take advantage of anything that may come along in those respects. But those are really the five big things. Get seeker done, make sure you have an engineering report, which you already do. You're starting seeker. Get through the State Historic Preservation Office, which we will do. Make sure that if we have any agreements or anything that needs to be done in that respect, that we get that done. And then we do have to do something called a smart growth assessment that will be part of the seeker process as well.
Okay, great. Thanks. I think we're moving along. Are there any other questions from any of the committee members?
Yeah, Vero has a quick question regarding the supervisors and mayors. Are they on the call today too? Are they listening in?
They were invited. I was just going to check with Kelly to see if there's any on there. They're up next.
We're invited. I'm only seeing one number that I don't recognize. Actually, if you can let me know who it is for the purpose of attendance for today's meeting, it's a 914-490 number.
That's Gedalia Teged, the Village of Tours, Joel, Town of Palm Tree.
Okay, thank you, Gedalia. And that looks like the only outside call that came in.
Okay, thank you, Kelly.
Is that it, John?
Yep.
Yep. All right. I just have one last thing. Just a quick question on meters. Is that moving along?
Bids are due Monday, Peter.
Excuse me?
Bids are due on Monday, Peter.
On Monday. Okay. Great. Anybody else have anything? Not hearing
I'm good.
I just want to remark too that it's Barry Cheney's birthday today.
Yeah. Happy birthday, Barry.
Happy birthday.
Yeah.
Happy birthday, Barry.
Happy
All right.
birthday, Barry.
Thank you all.
All right. Not having any other questions. Are there, Gedalia, do you have any of the municipal leaders?
Well, no, I was thinking about the financial impact and how that is being divided between longevity and improvements and cost of based on increase of growth. We're definitely open to an in-depth discussion on the growth-inducing needs and increase on capacity, but that division has to be done first so we know what we're talking about. So we're going to wait for the engineers to come up with better cost estimates. And I could also attest that bids have gone up drastically in light of COVID protections for workers and other stuff. So a new cost estimate would have to be done before that split is accepted by everybody. And we could talk afterwards about how the cost of the additional capacity should be handled.
Yeah, I think that's Mary Beth and the engineers are on that. And, you know, as they mentioned before, longevity would be by the whole district. And we're working out on the other for the expansion. I think that's still to be determined, but we're working towards it, Gedalia.
The only other issue that I haven't heard mentioned today is that nothing would be able to move forward if the DEC won't agree to increase the speedies permit from 6 million to 9 million. And that takes into consideration any variances on the chloride issue. And we haven't heard any update. What's the status with the DEC and with the settlement of that issue?
Langdon or Mary Beth, can you help us with that?
I can't right now, to tell you the truth. I have not been briefed by the Albany Council handling that, so I'll have to take a look at that. In any event, that'll be an attorney-client session.
Okay.
Okay, but we're moving forward on the seeker process to get this to 9 million. I hope it's all on good assumptions that DEC is going to ultimately issue a speedies permit for 9 million.
We hope so too, Gedalia. Otherwise, we're spending a lot of time for nothing.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. If no one has any other questions, I want to thank everybody for taking the time today and to have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved, Jeannie.
Mr. Chairman, before we adjourn, this is Katie. When are we planning on meeting again as the advisory committee?
I think that you know, if we can take this to physical services in July, that we can go. There may not be a need for a meeting before that again, unless everybody's working.
And the reason I ask, the reason I'm asking is that I find it very disheartening that we only have one of our local elected officials on this call. There are a multitude of municipalities that are involved in this. And initially, when I saw all of this, I was under the impression we forgot to invite them. And if they were all invited and they didn't participate, I mean, we're at a very important juncture right here, and we need them to be briefed. So I don't know what we do to spur something to get them to start attending these things. And I know, and you and I were on a call this morning where one of them was even participating in these things. So we know that they're doing it. I would just hope that they would participate with us as well. And I do thank Gedalia for attending this particular meeting.
It may be a technical glitch. I tried to join the meeting on Microsoft Teams and it didn't let me in. I tried to join the meeting on the county website and it didn't permit me in. So the only choice I was left with was the phone call and the password. So it may be a technical glitch that people may have tried and not got in.
Well, we should find that out.
This is Eric. I also had a similar issue, and I ended up having to use the phone number.
Okay, we should find that out. Thank you, Gedalia, and thank you, Eric.
All right, so we'll.
Yeah, I'm going to make the effort with my guys to see if they even attempted to get in today.
Yeah, I'll reach out.
I think that would be helpful.
And see. I'll reach out and see if any of them others had troubles too. But other than that, I think Katie, unless the committee thinks that we should meet before.
I don't see a need for it, but I do need that we should be going on record that they were invited, because you know this train is moving along. It may be moving a little slowly given our current circumstances, but you know, I want them to have every opportunity for input, but we can't keep stopping it because they don't know what's going on.
Absolutely. All right, so unless anybody else has anything, I had a motion to adjourn in a second, and all in favor? Thank you,
Aye.
everybody.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Peter. I
Aye.
appreciate you
Thank
doing
you.
this.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Chair.
Be safe, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Mr. Amo, are you staying on?